morning.
Good morning from sunny Lausanne. Actually, beautiful day. I hope you're all doing fine, staying healthy and safe. Numbers in Switzerland are starting to go up a bit, and we're all taking precautions. So I hope you are all doing okay. And I would love to know where you're signing from. So, and if we have some of our friends that come to several webinars, so if you can say hi in the chat and tell me, hi, Marcel. Yes, here you are. Thank you for coming. Marcel is joined us quite a few times. He's from Israel and Spain. So Winnie from Hong Kong too. Patrick also in Lausanne. Glenn from Copenhagen. Good. Welcome back, many of you. So I'm very happy to see you. We have a very special conversation today with Bruno Roche, and we're going to talk about economics of mutuality, but we'll get to that in some minutes. So, and I think the idea is also to make it, hi, Liv from Munich. Thank you, as always. It's good. And Private from Brussels. So we have like a nice European crowd for now, and Hong Kong, but it's good to see you all. And Bern, Maya. So thank you, Maya, for joining us from Bern. And the idea, again, as usually, these meetings or webinars, whatever you want to call them, the idea is to have a conversation on how can we move private capital to foster impact, and to spark social innovation, to spark market solutions that address social and environmental programs. And hello, Maria from Prague. And so today, and as you know, I try to put together a very varied type of guests and speakers and people that joins us, and especially from different agents that are now part of this big movement, or if you want, the impact economy. And I think we're very privileged to have Bruno Roche today, because this is kind of a lifetime commitment. It's not something that started now with COVID, but really he has been working, doing research, writing cases, and working with corporates on a very interesting framework, if you want, or solution, if you want, that is economics of mutuality. And we are going to get the opportunity to ask him questions and talk together and see how that can apply to you. So first, as you know, I like to make a little bit of an introduction, and I thought that it was a good time to present you something that we do at the Lea Center for Social Innovation. It is kind of a little framework that we use sometimes when we work with corporates, or I do sometimes in my custom programs or in some sessions that I do in the program, and it is very related to purpose. And there is a big hype about purpose, and we are going to talk about purpose today. But more than only talking about purpose, purpose is at the heart of what we're going to talk today with Bruno, actually, is how do you transform that purpose into strategy? How do you make that purpose actually come alive to transform an organization, and not only the organization, but actually to rethink the idea of prosperity and how we relate, if you want, with a broader ecosystem, and in a less instrumental way, if you want, to create this mutual positive impact. So when you talk about purpose, it's really the why a corporation exists. And we are going to talk especially, and I think this started at Mars, and Bruno will tell us a little bit more, and now the evolution to these days. But when we talk about why a corporation exists, and this doesn't have to be altruistic. It's not that you need to save all the children in the world, or it's really more that given who you are, what your core business is, how can you be of service? And this purpose, in many cases, the idea is it has to be related with the impact you want to have in the world. And that impact needs to be measured, because it's not just about having good intentions, having KPIs, and also you need to think about how you manage it. So whenever you define that purpose, and Bruno will talk a lot more and more details what purpose means for economics of mutuality, and how can you bring it to your own corporations. But the basic idea, and I think what is interesting, is that that purpose should define the what you do, what topics you focus, and how you think about the long-term value that you want to create. But not only the what, because if you have just the why and the what, you still need the leg that is the operational leg, the management side or the strategy side, but it really needs to drive strategy. In many cases, obviously you need to commit resources. I'm an economist, so sometimes the first thing I do is I look at how the budgets are divided and where you put money, and that tells you a lot about the priorities of companies these days. So do you dedicate resources? Have you changed your management agenda? Is this sitting at the board level, the discussions? Is it strategic or not? Is it siloed at the sustainability department maybe, or at the corporate relations department? No, how do you place the making of the purpose come alive? And also, how do you engage? And I think we'll talk a lot with Bruno today about this is not just an internal side of a business model transformation, but you are part of an ecosystem and you enter in relationship with different stakeholders. How do you define those stakeholders? How do you map them? We're going to go into details of how you do this, and with years of research behind how do you map that ecosystem. So engagement is not only about mapping, but it's about engaging, and collaborating is a key part. And at the end, the idea, again, is to unlock what the Lea Center is all about, that is social innovation, meaning new solutions that will have a positive impact and will transform yourself, but also society. If you see at the bottom of this kind of framework that we do, we have grand global challenges. And I think we're in an environment in the middle of a pandemic with fires raging the US and California. We had in different places too, and worried about climate change, worried about inclusion, worried about diversity. And we are at a time where the bringing up new solutions and think it at the ecosystem level and collaborating is actually a key. And I want to give you a quick definition. It's really not a super technical. You're going to find more technical definitions, but I wanted to give you one because when we talk about impact, it's not just about your actions. It's not what you do. It's what you do does to others. So a very simple definition that we're going to think about, and it could work also at a personal level, but at a corporate level, is the world with your involvement minus the world without your involvement. So when you enter in relationships, when you start producing goods and services, etc., what kind of impact do you have? What happens in the world that surrounds you? So we are going to get in a lot more detail into this, and we are going to talk specifically about how economics of mutuality answer many of these questions. But as you know, at the bottom of the screen, you have the Q&A part. So we do the informal side and the hellos in the chat, but the questions, the Q&A, we'll do through the Q&A part at the bottom or top. I don't know where you have it. I have it in the bottom, but you look for the Q&A icon because you can actually move it around. You are going to see a thing that you can click to. If somebody writes a question and you really like it, if you click on that that question will pop up for me. So I will see that question and I will be able to know that this is important for different people. Patrick Reichhardt, he's a research fellow at the Lea Center for Social Innovation and a PhD in social finance. He will be supporting us also with the chat and maybe replying to some of your questions if it's needed. But I will also try to put all your questions, as you know, if you've been part of these webinars before, I do my best to include almost all of them. So Bruno, be ready. I may interrupt you a couple of times with questions from the audience. So just to start, Bruno had an interesting question to pose to you. So I'm going to open a first poll to see what do you think about purpose, because now there's a lot of ink written, I think, since BlackRock came with the first letter in 2008, but then we had So there's a lot of things about talking about purpose. So what is, how would you describe the purpose of your company, of where you work or you have worked in the past, in case you're an MBA student? So from the purpose of my company is pure communication exercise to the purpose of my company is about addressing really meaningful challenges. If you're in between, you can do 2 or 3 or 4. So good, interesting. So we have I like the numbers because it shows that's my economist distribution side. We usually have a little bit of a biased sample because people that join these webinars obviously care about these topics. But if you see, we have almost 40. Let me end the poll and show it a little bit to everybody. I will share the results. So we have 42% of the people right now that really the company is addressing meaningful challenge. And we're doing some research with the Enterprise for Society. That is a collaboration we have with EPFL and HSM. Sorry, I'm sharing results, Bruno. I thought you were taking a picture. And we are finding that, especially after COVID, corporates are much more worried about than in the past about being more vocal about the purpose and even redefining it in a way that represents the current challenges. No, so there is a lot of talk around corporations or how do we make this meaningful and how do we make purpose a source of innovation, if you want. So I'm going to go further, and we have a second poll. So you thought we was done? No, we have a couple today. So what is the strategy of my company? Do you think your company focuses on maximizing profit and shareholder, obviously, profit at that time, or to really develop profitable solutions for the broader ecosystem, for your workers or providers, for the broader society? What do you think? If you have to think, you have to think. I said, if you have to think, I hope you think. So this is interesting. I can see the numbers, you cannot yet. So I keep a little bit of the. So I think I'm going to close the poll now for a couple of seconds. So we develop profitable solutions and look at the broader stakeholders, but we have a little less people than in the past, in the previous one. So I will share the results. So we have a more, I would say, a little bit of more spread in this one. And we are going to see that even though many companies actually talk a lot about purpose, when you look at what they prioritize, and sometimes in the culture, you know that doesn't get necessarily to you. And that brings me to the last question. How do you measure success? And if you are working for a corporation, whatever, if it is financial or any sector, do you really have only financial KPIs when you are compensated, when you are remunerated? Or are other KPIs included that are non-financial? Can be environmental, can be social. Do you have other KPIs? So let's see what happens, because this is going to an additional level of granularity, if you want, getting deeper into how corporations think about social and environmental issues. Good. So I think this is, again, interesting. I will finish it up here, even though I know it's some people, and I'll show. And in this one, we have even less in the previous non-financial KPIs. Still more people, but we are seeing that, and we have more in 3, 4, and 5. So still have our majority, I would say, from neutral to including other things, but we are having less and less granularity when we get into a little bit more detail. So we will talk a lot about this and how do you actually do these stages to hopefully have all of you very soon in the full 5s and inspiring, probably becoming social entrepreneurs and actually working to make these changes a reality into your companies. But let me just now introduce you a little bit formally. Bruno Roche, he's the founder and executive director of Economics of Mutuality, and he will tell us a little bit more about it. But Bruno has been in the past, before becoming a kind of a separate entity that he's going to tell us why, and he's going to tell us the story. He has been at Mars since 2006 as a chief economist and the head of Catalyst. Now, this was the company, so Mars internal think tank and the global thought leadership, where he put together a collaboration between economists, historians, business leaders, physicists, sociologists, engineers. I think many of us are talking these days about breaking silos and getting different views into the table. This was a reality even before the global financial crisis, if you want, 2008. And together with Mars, really Catalyst embarked in a unique journey of doing academic research and business practice in partnership with academic institutions to see what the role of multinational companies is and how they can collaborate. Now, as you know, I always like to invite people that also have this academic background and this will to share their knowledge with others. No, so they recognize actually the potential to reshape business and even management education at the time. So they created Economics of Mutuality as an independent public interest foundation. And he will tell us more a little bit, and he's now located in Geneva, so hopefully soon we'll get to have a lunch. Still, we're keeping a little bit of social distancing. But really, Bruno co-created also the Economics of Mutuality Lab at Oxford and the China International Business School of Shanghai. He's a visiting lecturer in several universities, and he's also an expert for the World Economic Forum. His academic background follows or actually comes from a math background with specialization in international economics and finance and management science. And he's also a book author or a co-author, if you want. He has a book on completing capitalism, Heal Business to Heal the World. And he has a forthcoming book precisely on many of the topics that we're going to talk today, that is putting purpose into practice, the Economics of Mutuality with Said Business School Professor Colin Meyer. So thank you, Bruno, for joining us today. It's really a privilege. And I know that this week, and I know you've been talking and writing about some of these issues, and probably many of you have seen, we are kind of celebrating, and I say it in quotations, 50 years of the famous article from Friedman in the New York Times that talked about the social responsibility of businesses to increase profits. So 50 years ago, and this is actually an article that shaped lots of people's education, I would say mine at least. I would not say my practice, but we grew up saying the business of business is business. No, we should focus on this, and this will actually benefit society through market. It's not the responsibility of business to look at different stakeholders, and actually you need to pay taxes, you need to work with, you need to enforce private property, but why do you want Mars, for example, thinking about education or thinking about poverty? Is not their core business. So we were very embedded in this philosophy of thinking, okay, we need to guarantee profit for shareholders. No, and 50 years later, in the middle of this COVID crisis, we are questioning a lot of these paradigms, and clearly we are rethinking what were the implications of this paradigm. And I think these implications go well beyond Friedman's article, no, and how the instrumental way that we're doing business. So I know you, Bruno, you see this crisis as a turning point, but can you tell us why and what has changed, or what do you think it has changed in the last 50 years?
Well, thank you so much, Vanina, for this great introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good night to everyone, depending on where you are. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, and specifically to have a chance to share with you I think the passion or the vocation I had for the last 20 years on this topic. And it's very interesting to see actually that See, there is a quote we say in my country. We say, well, it's good to be right. It's better to be right at the right time. So you can choose to be right. You can't choose the right time. And I think now is a coincidence between being right. I mean, I'll try to be humble on defining what it is, but I think essentially the time is now. That's for sure. So maybe if you go to the next slide, the slide number 7, Vanina. I was wondering whether, I know many people talk about the COVID, etc., but I like to say a few things about the COVID. I think, you see, this crisis changed quite dramatically the way we live because of the lockdown and the quarantine, the way we work. Yes, we are working from home. We have to apply some social distancing. The way we interact, we have to do a lot of social distancing and also virtual connections. The way we consume, we do a lot of online shopping. The way the business operates, no travels, airlines go burst, stock markets kind of go up and down. The good news for the planet is that there is a significant reduction to the carbon footprint and pollution. But maybe what's most interesting is that the people who kept the system alive, they are not the investment bankers or the people who are making tons of money. They are the nurses, the doctors, the delivery men, the teachers, the farmers. And also, who rescued the system? It's the government. The government. It's not a big corporation. So eventually, government have become again a central player in economics to after with decades of withdrawal. So, yeah, I mean, of course, this pandemic is not the only one we had in history. We had pandemic over many times, but I think this one actually is revealing some of the weaknesses, but also some of the strengths that we have in our society. And the people we believed strong are not as strong as they used to be, or not as strong as we wanted them to be. And the people who were actually kind of on the sideline happened to be actually the people that we need to rescue the system and make it work, and specifically government, and also the I would put it this way, the ordinary people, and I put myself in this category. So if you go to the next slide, page number 8, I like to start with some historical background. You see, well, for people who live in China, you know that actually the word crisis is made of two hieroglyphs, which essentially means a time of danger, but also a time of opportunity. So it is rooted in the Chinese culture, but also there is in a Judeo-Christian culture, there is this kind of thinking that there is a time for everything under heaven, and a time to break down and a time to build up. And wisdom, and maybe leadership in this case, is about to discern the time and the seasons, and when to change and when not to change, when to break down and when to build up. And I think we are at this moment in time when some of the elements of the paradigm that we had before have to be broken down, but some of them actually have to be rebuilt. And this is the calling of page 9, which is essentially it's not new, but I think this timing is even more important in the sense that there is today a duty, but also an opportunity So I think we have to look at it at both ways, not only for business leaders, but also for investors, for management schools, and to some extent policymakers, to really reposition corporation positively. I mean, business existed way before financial capitalism. I mean, business didn't wait the article Milton Friedman to operate and be successful. So it could actually live way after financial capitalism. If financial capitalism is not in service of business, and if business is in service of society, eventually this alignment will be removed, and we will move to another doctrine. So, and the purpose of my talk today is to say, well, we really want to, it's no longer about like lofty purpose or lofty declaration. It's really about actually, instead of I have this friend of mine who's talking about this shifting sense of unfilled promises. And we have many of them actually. And this actually is, if you look at the inflation of promises coming from the corporate world, so and eventually these promises are not fulfilled. So the purpose of the next 20 minutes is just to share with you a little bit humbly what we've done to bring these kind of big ideas, but also to set them up and to implement them in a real business environment. Because Mars, as you probably know, is a consumer goods company which actually is selling chewing gums and chocolate and pet food. So it's difficult to be more practical, right? Than just a bag of croquettes for pets. And essentially, we managed to show actually that it's possible to for even the large corporations to embrace a new paradigm for value creation. And that's the purpose of the next
I
few
really
minutes.
like this idea of unfulfilled promises. I think, or how do we go back and actually fulfill them? No, how do we innovate? Because I think we see a lot of disheartened people, and we see a lot of dissolution, and we see populism, and we see. So how do we actually go back and fulfill those solutions in a different ways if we feel that the path that we've been going is not the right one? So let's see, and tell us a little bit more of why we need to change this Friedman's paradigm, and we talked a little bit about, so I wanted to share that with other people here.
It's interesting to see actually this article was written exactly 50 years ago, and 50 at least in our culture in the West, it's often associated with a reset. This is concept of jubilee. Even in the UK, actually, you lease land for 49 years. So it's interesting to see actually that we have this. We're speaking today like exactly 50 years after this article was written, and actually, I did a bit of history, and I looked at the number of times the monetary system has changed over the last 300 years. Actually, it has changed 6 times. And so on average, every 50 years, the monetary system is kind of being reset. And essentially, you probably know actually that 71 actually corresponds to also to the end of the gold standard, which actually ushered a new era for the monetary system.
Yeah.
And so we are actually almost at 49 years after this. So it's interesting to see there are some real questions about the Milton Friedman model. There are also some questions about the monetary system and the supremacy of the dollar. So it's interesting to see that we are at this time of breaking down and rebuilding up. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, so we can move directly to the slide number 11. Because essentially, over the last 50 years, if we want just to take a very simple perspective, economics is just the management of scarcities. When I teach economics, I say, well, it's a complex social blah 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 whatever, but it boils down to one very simple concept: it's management of scarcities. 50 years ago, financial capital was scarce, and we needed more liquidity in the system. But natural capital were overly abundant. So at that time, it makes sense actually to develop a financial capitalistic system to address the financial capital scarcities in the model. Today, 50 years later, we have very different form of scarcities. Financial capital is overly abundant to the extent that we have negative interest rates, which has become the norm. But we have other form of scarcities in the natural capital, also in the social human capital. But the economic model has not adjusted. So it's not an ideology. I can tell you without being wrong that the economic model will change. Collectively, we'll find a way to address these new form of scarcities because it's a way to survive as human beings. My only hope is actually that this transition will happen peacefully through knowledge, education, and not through wars or catastrophic events, but it will happen. That's number one, right? There's number one change that's happened. Second change is that at the same time, companies, especially multinational corporations, have increased tremendously in size to the extent today they rival the power and influence of nation states. Even a company like Mars, which has revenue about 40 billion, is about 50% more than the GDP of a country like Cote d'Ivoire. So, and this didn't exist before. So it's been actually that the agents of change are no longer the state alone; they are also large corporations. But the problem is that the same way we have not adjusted our economic model at the macro level, we have not adjusted our management model at the micro level, which essentially is making business leaders today are ill-equipped to handle the complexities and the challenges that the size of the companies confer on them. That's the second thing, which actually is a second element, which is explaining why the Friedman doctrine is actually no longer appropriate for business. The third one is a rapid move from what we call a kind of a service and industrial economy, which is very financial capital intensive, to a knowledge economy or digital economy or fourth industrial revolution, whatever you want to call it, which is actually far less financial capital intensive and far more human and social capital intensive. So for all of its reasons, actually, you have shifts from financial capital as a way to measure performance, to other forms of capital, which actually are as important, even more important, to fuel and support the growth of business. And last week we had Paul Polman at our forum in Oxford, and sorry to do a bit of publicity to Oxford, but he said something which I need to check actually, because he was intriguing. You know, Paul was a former CEO of Unilever, but he was also a former CFO of Unilever, and he said something that the current accounting system only captures 15% of the value creation. 15. So it means actually that the financial accounting system, I need to check these figures, but I believe these are right. I mean that if you only focus on financial capital within the boundaries of your firm, you're only accounting for 15% of the value creation. What business leaders would like to rely on a tool that only explains 15% of its core performance? Nobody. Right. So that's actually the introduction of my talk, and then we can go a bit deeper into the methodology. So if we go to the next slides. So essentially, the whole purpose there is to say, well, we are gradually moving from a shareholder form of capitalism to stakeholders. Okay, but that transition is not that easy, and you could argue actually that there have been hundreds of initiatives that actually have tried to push business in that direction. And it started with the non-profit world, then started to actually to get some interest from academia. But frankly speaking, it's not yet a reality in business. And my argument is that it's that because it's not. It's presented as a cost, or it's presented as a constraint on business. It's presented as something actually that business have to do as a license to operate. Okay, my argument actually it's an innovation. It's that business that know how to mobilize other form of capital and are capable of mobilizing these resources not only within the boundaries of the firm, but also in the ecosystem in which they operate. Not only they have a better impact on society and the environment, but they also outperform economically. And the analogy I like to make is to, you see, slavery was an excellent economic model. I mean, countries built empires on slavery. So you couldn't say that economically slavery didn't work. I mean, forget about the moral dimension. Okay, but there was a very poor management of the human and social capital of this population that were slaves. And when slavery was abolished, it unlocked resources, talent, energy that actually ushered a period of incredible growth and prosperity. I think we are at a similar point in time. Financial capital works, no doubt. I mean, if we speak today, it's because it's actually it's working, but it is not because it's working. It's not suboptimum. There is a better model, and the argument of the economics of mutuality we're going to share with you is that we demonstrate, from an academic perspective, but also from a real concrete perspective, that companies that build a strategy behind mobilizing different forms of capital and developing reciprocal relationships with their stakeholders outperform. So it is an innovation. It's not another corporate social responsibility program. It's not a way to look good or to feel good. It's not a way to mitigate risk on the periphery of the business. It is actually an innovation similar to a technological innovation. When business invests in a technology, they should expect a return from that investment. So we are on similar phase. And actually, we have a saying at Mars, which says that the good doesn't make noise, and noise doesn't do good. So, in a sense, just it's good business practice to practice what I'm going to share with you in a few minutes.
Great. So now you see in the audience why we have some things in common, precisely of this idea of the importance of putting innovation that is broader, the social innovation. I would say that the traditional just commercial innovation, if you want, of products at the center of strategy. So you told me a very interesting anecdote that I would like you to share with us. Know that in 2006 you had a call from the chairman of Mars and management, and they asked you a very unusual question, and they asked you, since you were the chief economist, they say, what should be the right level of profit for a corporation? And so what did you answer? And did you find the answer in these last 15 years?
Yeah.
What can you tell us? And is that economics of mutuality?
Well, yes. Actually, when you introduced these webinars at the beginning, Vanina, you said it didn't start because of the COVID. So, yeah. And you're right. Actually, there was a discussion at Mars in 2006, so like almost 2 years before the crisis. There was a big debate between the management of the firm and the board of directors of the firm. And they were arguing about what should be the right level of profit. And the management wanted to increase profits, and the board of directors wanted to limit the profit to lower level. And the question was not about whether we should give back or not. It was, what is the level of profit that would maximize the performance of the company? I repeat that. The question was, what is the level of profit that should maximize the performance of the company? And I was just appointed chief economist at the time, and they said, well, this is a question we cannot reconcile, management and the board. So it's typically a question we ask to our chief economist. And my immediate reaction, I said, oh shit, this is a question I could add very easily by doing a bit of benchmark and blah blah blah. But I said there is something more behind it. It's of course it's a business question, because you could argue that there is a relationship between profit and growth, but it's also fundamentally an ethical question. And what are the principles that you would essentially use or apply to justify the profit you take from the system in which you operate and for which you depend? So, to my surprise, this question has never been studied in management and economics, and still today it's a blind spot. The only response we had at the time was a Milton Friedman response, as much as you can, right? So this is because, so we embarked on a long journey actually and we called it the Economics of Mutuality, and we'll tell you why in a few minutes. But eventually, we now have, after like 14 years of deep research, many mistakes, lots of patience from people who believed eventually in this model, and also, but a lot of practical implementation in Europe, in the US, in China, in Africa. And yes, it's possible now to define the right level of profit that would maximize the performance of the firm in its ecosystem. It's not a magic number. It is the outcome of a transformation process. And we call it actually, it's about transforming business performance at the core, with the objective that business should thrive or prosper by meeting the needs of the world. So it starts with number one, which is about purpose has to be treated as strategy. And I will talk to that in a moment, right? But purpose is not a communication asset. It's not like something to look nice or to galvanize your people. No, it is a strategic asset. Then there is a second element, which is about you can't do business alone. You can't be mutual on your own. You have to understand the ecosystem of stakeholders that actually are not material to you, but material to your purpose. And these actually are resources, not only to fulfill the purpose, but also to grow your performance. Then, of course, you have to measure, because management is about measurement, and hell is paved with good intentions. So if you don't create the right metrics to incentivize, monitor progress, you eventually end up with chaos. So we had to develop a number of metrics that would account for the value created and destroyed by the company across natural capital for the environment, social human capital for the people. And I will, if I have time, I will tell you why we have to put a distinction between social and human capital, and of course, financial capital, but in the context of shared financial capital, how much money is being eventually created and shared by the ecosystem. And then finally, in order to respond to the initial questions, is that we had to modify the definition of profit. Because today, financial profit is perfectly aligned if the purpose of the company is to maximize financial performance. But if the purpose of the company is something else, and I'll come to it in a minute, then if you only measure profit through financial means, you eventually create a tension in your organization. So we eventually come up with definition of profits, which is a way to actually to answer the questions. And I just want to say like one minute on this, because the problem came from finance. So the solution will come from finance. And Vanina, thank you for introducing me as that my PhD was in economics, but actually my PhD is in finance. So I come from this world. So I probably have more sense than anybody else listening to this call. So, but I know the language of finance. I know how it works, and I think in a sense, this transformation will happen through the finance function. That's critically important, right? So that's why we eventually say, if you change the profits, if you modify the management account for the company, then eventually you can create a complete transformation. So purpose. So purpose is actually, we come up with a statement. Actually, the statement is a statement that we co-defined with Colin Mayer in Oxford University. And we said, well, purpose of business is not to make profit. This is the kind of provocation, but purpose of business is to produce profitable and scalable solutions to the problems of people on the planet, and not profiting from creating problems. So I repeat that. The purpose of business is to create profitable solutions, not profiting from creating problems. So any company actually can take this purpose and make it real for its own environment. So what do we mean by purpose? Maybe you can go to the next slide.
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, very quickly here, we after like dozens of of discussions and reading, etc., we came up with a topology of purpose. You have purpose actually are self-affirming description, like R&D that improves health. So it's many companies actually choose a purpose to describe what they do. Some companies are a bit more inspirational, and they essentially that their purpose is essentially their values, what they stand for in terms of values. But some companies, which are the top, choose to define their purpose as addressing a meaningful challenge. The example here we have from Novo Nordisk is that it's a company that sells insulin, and they are in the business of selling insulin to cure diabetes. They choose, initially, actually, it's changed a little bit, but initially they choose that to eradicate diabetes. So essentially they choose a purpose which eventually meant the end of their current business model, because they were outside-in centric, and they said, well, the real problem is to eradicate diabetes. So eventually you can cure diabetes through insulin, of course, but it's not the only way. You can actually, so they started with an ecosystem of players which actually was all aligned behind addressing meaningful challenge. And our research showed that actually that companies that are driven by a meaningful challenge, guess what? They outperform. They usually tend to shape and dominate their market. So there is a real relationship between the quality and the nature of the purpose and the economic performance. Next slide.
Elke is asking a question, and it's almost 40, so we'll have to go a little fast because I want to have two questions. They wanted to get to the metrics too and the capitals. He's asking about why it's also ethical, and what are the ethical principles to put purpose at the right point. And I know you like that, but maybe just a short answer to that part. Why it's not only it makes economic sense, but it is grounded on ethical principles to departure from the essence of purpose.
Sorry, I just want to ensure that I properly understood, because the connections
right, okay. Well. I read exactly the question. Would you be able to comment on the ethical principles, not the economic, why purpose, right, the point of departure for business? I know you're a finance person, economist, and works in economics, but I know you do have this background on the ethical side and how they marry both things actually,
Well, I think, in a sense, so I respond to the second question first. In a sense, what I said at the beginning of my talk, that purpose is a strategic asset. I think it's critically important because the way you will define the purpose, and actually you can go to the next slide because it's one way to respond that. It helps to define the boundaries of the firm. So it's a very pragmatic concept to say, well, okay, as a company, I'm not here to solve all the problems of the world, but I can solve some. And the sum or the definition of how many purpose actually the purpose helps define the challenge that you want to address and not address. So that's actually the pragmatic perspective. Now, the ethical perspective is that, in philosophy, in religion, in the notion of relationship is core. Actually, even some religion defines the true image of God is not the person. The true image of God is a relationship between two individuals. In the West, we tend to overemphasize the individualistic aspect. In Asia, we tend to overemphasize the community aspect. But I think the balance is actually the quality of the relationship between individuals, which actually is at the core of who we are as human beings. And when the relationship between us and others is functional or harmonious or whatever, we are in a higher level of performance. So the idea actually that the interest of the other, that you have to love your neighbors like yourself, so it's really core to many philosophical thinking, is actually something that we translate here in economics. So it's like a natural law that exists in sociology or in whatever, that we translate here in economics. And we show actually that when we do that, guess what? The business is more functional, the relationships are more functional, so eventually they create more value. And to that extent, we need to, of course, but we need to go a bit faster. We need to, of course, the second thing is, of course, that you are not, as a business, you are not at the center of your ecosystem. You are just a stakeholder. And your role as a business is probably to orchestrate. So there is a need to do this kind of a Copernican revolution, that you need to decenter yourself. And actually, it's not an easy process. Many people are self-centered. Many companies are self-centered. And in order to embrace the full potential of this kind of economics of mutuality, you have to choose a purpose, of course, to yourself. But you also have to accept that you are not at the center. So you are, in a sense, in service of a higher purpose. And that your role as a business is to orchestrate. And by doing this also, so we have developed a set of methodologies to map the ecosystem, to identify the pain points. So it's a fairly sophisticated and well-defined process, but we call it ecosystem mapping, ecosystem orchestration. But that's the second step of the element. So purpose first, ecosystem second. Now we can move to the metrics.
We had Peter Brescher precisely asking about metrics. Now, what do you measure? Tangible assets, intangible assets, monetary metrics, hybrid metrics. No, and I know you have a very interesting framework of the 4 capitals. Can you explain that to us and how you measure? No.
Page 22. So essentially, we started from the hypothesis that, of course, business needs financial capital to operate. Obviously, we need money from lenders, from investors, but we also need other form of capital. Business, we need natural capital because that's the land that provides. We need people capital because it's the people who transform. And we need also to find a way actually to ensure that this financial capital is created is shared. So we spend actually a lot of time. I mean, if you want to know more on this, you can go back to my books or our website. But we spent literally 6 years to define these metrics because we wanted them to be simple, so that you don't need a PhD in sociology to understand what they mean. They will also be actionable, so that business, through interventions, business can grow social capital, business can grow human capital, business can grow natural capital, but also that this capital would not just be like a nice to have for reporting purposes, but they would have a causal relationship with the economic performance of the company. So this is a set of capital which actually are these three characteristics: actionable, simple, and connected with financial performance. And on top of that, they are generic. So they are not project specific. And essentially, it's we're now showing that when the companies, for instance, invest in social human capital, we have an example at the end of the charts. Yeah, I mean, guess what? It's like when they invest in marketing or in advertising, or when they invest in innovation, they expect a return from that investment. So that's the core of where we are. So we are still like a very business centric. We say, okay, we need financial capital, and we have a lot of tools to do that, but we need also other capital. So therefore, we also need other tools. So I will now move to a few examples, but instead of going a bit fast. And if you want, Vanina, feel free to share the presentation to everyone. But I'd like to spend a bit of time on page 27, because I realize that we want to leave time for questions and answers.
Yes. 2 seconds. Yes,
right.
There we are.
So here it's an example that we did with a very large retailer in Europe, like a company that actually employs I think 850,000 people, and they contacted us a few years ago because they were intrigued with the approach that we had, and we said, yeah, fine. So let's try to test this economics of mutuality principles on a completely new business environment. So it's a do-it-yourself type of store, so it's very, very different to the mass the environment. And eventually we applied this kind of concept, purpose, ecosystem, measurement of social, human, natural capital in the ecosystem, and we came up with a very interesting set of data. And we said, now we need to do something. We need to look at whether we took shops that actually were underperforming economically, and we took shops that were overperforming economically, just from a pure financial capital perspective. And we draw this correlation that the shops that were richly endowed of social and human capital in their ecosystem performed twice as better as the shops that were not as endowed in terms of social, human, and natural capital. So that was very intriguing. I said, now what are the drivers of value creation? And that we find here. Actually, we found actually that the social capital, essentially, which is the quality of relationship between the business unit and its environment in terms of stakeholders, has an impact of 2.7 times more impactful on the performance than the investment in human capital, in the investment of like shared financial capital. And it's not a unique pattern. We've seen that many times. What we call the social capital, that actually many organizations don't take into account. Many companies focus on human capital, knowledge, skills, whatever, okay, or on sharing the financial capital. Like, okay, we have to ensure that there is not too much spread between the in the distribution. This is important, of course. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's important, but it is less impactful on the performance of the firm than the quality of the relationship that the business unit establishes with its ecosystem. That's actually almost the elephant in the kitchen that nobody sees, and it is one of the distinctiveness of what economics of mutuality brings to the table. I think we bring two, in a sense, innovation. We develop a fairly simple and structured approach to bring business to a form of transformation, positioning the doing good agenda as a management innovation with impact on the performance of the business. So it shouldn't be seen as a cost. It should be seen as an investment to grow, to reach higher level of performance. And the second thing I think it's really distinctive is that we put the finger on the importance of the social capital, which is often ignored in understanding how a business unit or a business performs in the ecosystem. But I think I will stop here, Vanina, because I want to take some questions.
Exactly. And I have an interesting question from Felipe, precisely. He said, based on your experience, what are the barriers and opportunities for companies to share part of the profitability with people, society, and planet? But I would go also in general, what are the main barriers that you see in your experience with different companies to change, to transform?
I think the barriers are the same barriers that you find in any innovation. In a sense, there are some organizations, some leaders which are more open to change than others. I remember the quote at the beginning, like, it's good to be right, it's better to be right at the right time. So I think we are at this time where eventually, I think until the COVID, we could collectively live with kind of a tension or hypocrisy of doing business as usual and to have a set of CSR type of initiative on the other side, and we could actually manage the in parallel. I think the COVID will make this kind of tensions almost impossible to manage anymore. So business will have to choose now. Either they go back to traditional way of doing business with maximizing profit, etc., or they will have to embrace a new paradigm for value creation. And actually, leadership is all about this. So I know it's not a strict answer, but I think there are a number of changes that we propose in Economics of Mutuality, and the fact that it's purpose-centric and not business-centric, the fact that actually you need to mobilize as a form of capital in order to be successful, that you have to change your management account to incentivize people. So there are a number of transformation that we need to take place, and it's not an easy process. It's like any turnaround. I mean, it's never. I mean, turnaround is never a nice thing to do. You enjoy the turnaround after, not during, right? And but essentially to go back specifically to the questions was, it's very interesting because I have different type of interlocutors. There are people who really are taken by it because almost philosophically and they want to make it happen. There are some people who say, oh yeah, by the way, it's a very smart way of running my business. Okay, it's a way actually to capture more value and in a sense also to create a more resilient ecosystem. And the COVID actually helps defining performance as resilient. But there are some people who actually just don't care. And I don't know why they don't care. I mean, I remember this quote of Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, said, every truth has to go through 4 stages. The first one, it is ignored. The second one, it is ridiculed. The third stage, that it is violently opposed. And the fourth stage, that it is accepted as self-evident. So I think leadership goes through this kind of 4 stages as well. And my hope and my observation is that people are moving more closely to we are no longer ridiculed when we talk about this. We still have some opposition, but we're no longer ridiculed. And I think the contribution of this work and others is actually to show actually that it is good business practice, but it will take time.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you don't only measure how companies create value or even capture value, but also they need to account how if the value is destroyed. No, because in economics many times we attach that as externalities and it was not internalized, and it's a huge movement now of impact weighted accounts and internalizing externalities, the way that there's a lot of regulation actually on reporting this side of the story. So I think the measuring side and the strategy of how you change that is very interesting. I hate this question when somebody asks it, but I will ask it to you too anyway and see because of your experience. OEM, in this case, I don't know exactly the name, but he's asking, which companies would you say are doing best at this respect using this model? Can you give some names and examples? Or if you had to think...
I mean, I will not give the name of the company I come from because it would be too biased. But I was very inspired by 2 companies actually recently. Novo Nordisk is one of them, and also Mahindra First Choice in India. So if you're interested, I mean, we have the case studies on our website. So if you go on eom.org, you will find these case studies, which are actually how companies actually are embracing this kind of concept and how they outperform by doing this. And Mahindra is a car company in India, and Novo Nordisk is a pharmaceutical company in Denmark. So it's two examples.
Yeah, I will. From my side, I really like what Neste is doing, especially because it's an oil and gas company. I wouldn't say directly Economics of Mutuality, but that's a company that is worth checking out. And last question, because time is like very running like out and like extremely fast. So what is your understanding of Economics of Mutuality in terms of infinite growth in a finite world? No, and it is related to like the donut theory of Kate Rother, but can we keep focus on this idea of growth? And I know you talk about prosperity rather than growth. No, so if you want like the last takeaways and thinking about this change of paradigm and how we think about growth.
Yeah, the philosophical choice we made with Economics of Mutuality is to, I mean, it's described on page 24. If you want to know more, is to say, well, I mean, social and human capital can grow without limit. Yeah, but natural capital is limited. So we need to find a way to do more with less. And we instead of measuring the output, which is essentially the CO2, the carbon emission, whatever, we are measuring the input. And we apply what is called a resource efficiency approach. And we measure year on year the economic growth that's coming from 1 unit of material, of 1 unit of natural capital assets. And we measure that we can do more with less. We can actually create more light, we can create more movement, we can create more Mars bar, we can create more whatever by taking less. And this it is a management innovation which is called resource efficiency. It's called factor 4. It's been there for a long time. But we are still the proponent of that. Human beings are here to multiply and fructify, but not at the expense of where they come from, which is the land. And because even in the way we are, and we will finish maybe on a philosophical note. Even in our culture, the Adam, which is actually according to the Judeo Christian, is the first man, right? But Adam comes from the word Adama in Hebrew, which means the earth, the land. So we have this kind of a symbiotic relationship between who we are and the land. So when we look after the land, we look after ourselves. So it's okay for the man to multiply and fructify, but not at the expense of who he is, which essentially is a land. So we have this kind of good practical approach to say, well, it's possible through technology and through intentions to continue to grow, to multiply and fructify, but actually taking less and less year after year from the land. And we have plenty of examples like this, and it's working.
So thank you so much. Bruno, is already 12, and I want to appreciate it. I want to finish precisely on that note, on the challenge of how do we live within the boundaries of this planet, because we already passed the point where we're overusing resources this year, and how do we inspire innovation that actually creates positive impact for all the stakeholders we get in touch, and that actually that idea of impact, that the world without us compared to the world we are in, it becomes a better place. So thank you so much for the inspiration. And let me share with all of you, in case you want to contact Bruno or Economics of Mutuality, here you have some information. And looking forward to see many of you in 2 weeks for the next webinar. And thanks so much, Bruno. You have a partner in crime here for whatever you need. And the same to all of you. Thank you so much, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Vanina, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.